Today's story continues on in Mark chapter 12, from where Carla led us last week in my absence. Thank you all for making church together. Even after no one had dared ask Jesus any more questions, he continued teaching in the temple courts. And a large crowd gathered to listen to him speak. And they listened with delight as he offered them riddles to ponder. And as Jesus was teaching, he said to them, "Watch out for the legal experts. They like to walk around in long robes. They want to be greeted with honor in the markets. They long for places of honor in the synagogues and at banquets. They are the ones who cheat widows out of their homes, and to show off, they say long prayers. They will be judged most harshly." Now Jesus went and sat across from the collection box for the temple. Several of his disciples followed him. And he observed how the crowd gave their money. Many rich people were coming forward and throwing in lots of money. But then one poor widow came forward and put in 2 small copper coins. And Jesus called his disciples to him and said, "I assure you that this poor widow has put in more than everyone who's been putting money in the treasury. All of them are giving out of their spare change. But she, from her hopeless poverty, has put in everything she had, even what she needed to live on." And so, as always, I invite you to wander along with me about today's story. This story begins just after Jesus has avoided many verbal traps laid for him by the chief priests, the scribes, the elders, the Pharisees, the Herodians, the Sadducees, all various influential groups in Jerusalem that we heard about last week. I wonder where they all have gone off to while Jesus continues his teaching.
Are they back home?
They're going back home.
Maybe some of them are gathering with their friends and pointing out, hey, there's this guy talking smack about us in the temple. Maybe they're, gathering.
So they're gathering somewhere else.
Yeah.
Maybe they're plotting more traps.
They're plotting more traps.
They have lives to lead, right? They have to go out and support themselves and their families.
Sure.
So they're not in the temple constantly.
Sure, they have business to attend to. They have lives to lead. So I wonder how the crowd reacted to him saying to watch out for legal experts, and even that the experts would be the ones most judged most harshly of all, most harshly of all.
Perhaps because they put themselves ahead of everybody else.
Okay, so they would, so the crowd recognized that they put themselves ahead of everybody else.
Wanting the seats of honor and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe the crowd agreed.
Maybe the crowd agreed.
Perhaps the crowd saw them using the law to suit their own purposes rather than to the benefit of all the people, the benefit of the common person. Manipulating.
They saw how people with power were manipulating, using power for their own purposes.
Maybe there were mixed reactions. Some people in the crowd could have benefited.
Yeah, so maybe they had mixed reactions, weren't quite sure what to think of him saying these things. Yeah, maybe they were excited to hear someone saying something that they already, whispered or secretly thought. Jesus says that the poor widow put in more money than everyone else, which, on the face of it, is simply not true. The widow's contribution was the smallest of all. So, I wonder by what standard Jesus recognizes her contribution as more than everyone else's.
Maybe because the money means more to her.
Okay, the money means more to her. So it's might be based more than everyone else's because the money meant more to her personally.
Well, it's based on percentage of income.
Okay, so maybe it's a simple percentage, simple math there, all right?
She gave from her heart.
So there's something about the intention there of her giving from her heart.
And there was a sacrifice involved, right?
Mhm.
She sacrificed something she needed in order to get.
Right, so there's a giving up of something that was made an impact on her own life to give it up. I wonder what our world would look like if we judged people's contributions by this standard, these standards.
Our tax law would probably look a bit different.
Our tax law would look different.
It would look very different.
Mm-hmm.
The really super wealthy would not be so lauded for their generosity in terms of contributions to big organizations and stuff, because they give it out of extreme wealth.
Sure.
And they're not hurting. It doesn't hurt them. It
So-
helps them.
Yeah, so buildings would be named after different people, perhaps, if they were not named after who gave the most to build this building for,
Whatever.
some organization. Yeah, how we honored the people who were giving was different.
This story always brings to mind to me an experience I had in Kenya where I was attending a mass and people were coming forward to give their money, and it was like barefoot women giving one piece of money and out of their poverty, and it just, I've always been struck by that, and that story always resonates with me around that, because I've seen people giving out of their poverty.
So you've seen this in real life and been impacted by that.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
There are places where legal fines for tickets and stuff aren't absolute dollars. They're based somehow on your percentage of wealth. And you hear about, someone who has a $150,000 speeding ticket. There are a few countries that do this. That would be,
Sure.
that would,
To make it actually mean something.
yeah,
to
to
the
make it mean
person.
something, that, that would pull the cost of disobeying the law away from just being a cost of doing business
Mhm.
to an actual meaningful fine for anyone.
Mhm.
I think about the organization or institution that's receiving the money. Are they using it for good, or are they using it for themselves? So if somebody's gonna give if they're impoverished and they're giving, I don't know, I'm not saying this right, but I would hope that who they're giving it to would honor that and follow through with it rather than using it for, and I don't know how that worked back in Jesus' time in regard to the Pharisees, like was that actually used for God's work, or did the Pharisees use that to enrich? I don't know how that works, but even just modern day, people giving, thinking they're giving for to help God, and it ends up going to buy new cars or something.
Yeah, so you're wondering about the receiving organization's response and perhaps responsibility, and how
Yeah.
they engage with folks who are giving of their own meaningful amount.
Yeah, if they're giving to the point where it's a sacrifice, there's also a responsibility on the other end. It's not just the responsibility of us, the people that are giving, so to speak. There's also the responsibility of the people receiving.
So how do you make sure the widows are still taken care of?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I realize that's not what the story's about. That was what was coming up for me, is
Yeah.
just the responsibility of the people receiving that.
Yeah.
Kind of tag team on that. It feels good to give, so the widow gave, but I'm just worried about her because I hope she has something to eat that night or the next morning. But maybe her community's going to take care of her.
Right. Yeah.
I don't tell people about money all the time, it's part of my job, and money is security, and I don't actually think the majority of people could give sacrificially. I actually think we would have less giving. Like if we said we were only going to notice, or we're going to laud people who gave only sacrificially, I agree that it feels good to give, but the average person doesn't give sacrificially. And the average person, I don't think, can mentally and emotionally give sacrificially, especially where we are in late stage capitalism. And so I actually think it would drive down.
I do actually think like what happens with the resources matters to the story, and kind of what you're saying. If we have a community and a culture that cares for one another beyond the resources that each individual has, live in. Because there's an act of faith in giving sacrificially, and there is I think, a need for the community to be then caring outside of each individual's resources for one another.
Sure.
And I wonder what our society would be like if that's how we oriented ourselves.
Yeah, and another layer of this, as we're discussing, care for the widows and others like them, giving sacrificially. We live in a society where the social safety net looks a lot different than what it was in this time, and that also is an important aspect of understanding giving and trusting in others to be taken care of.
I've always found the framing of this particular gospel story, like where they chose to start the story and end the story that went into the lectionary, I've always found that interesting because we start with a discussion about folks who make their living off the widows and orphans, the folks who have the means to, exploit them out of their houses, for example. That's how the passage starts. And then it ends with a description of a widow potentially doing the same thing, consensually. And that's always struck me, how the passage is framed there. And I don't think that was meant, the way it was framed, but it does strike me. And so I do wonder where her money goes.
Sure, yeah. So this story, Jesus says something about the legal experts benefiting in a predatory manner off of the widows, and then we see the widow voluntarily give.
Yeah.
And this obviously was an intentional choice in the writing of the gospel to pair those moments right together, but on the surface it could be almost an undercutting of what Jesus is saying, because he's talking about it in an involuntary manner, it sounds like.
Yeah.
But here's a voluntary moment. So what might that be saying?
I don't know. I just noticed it as as we told the story today, I noticed the pairing of those.
I am thinking more this time hearing about just by being a widow, people are watching how she's spending her money, which people do to welfare recipients all the time. Like, you're spending that on a new pair of shoes, how dare you, propping you up in our society. Are they, I kind of don't like that Jesus noticed how much she put in the collection basket, to use her as a lesson in a way.
Sure.
That there might be people that are saying, as a community, we took care of you and brought you meals. Why are you giving your money away when you should be using it so we don't have to prop you up anymore?
Right, so there's a bit of, Jesus, why are you using her as content for your lesson, right? Leave her alone. Let her make her own choices. Yeah? I wonder where the good news is for you in today's story.
For me, the good news is that intent matters. That she may not have given the most or even very much, but her intent to do something good with this scarce resource that she had an impact over and above the absolute impact of the resource she gave away. And that's a comforting thought when surrounded by folks who can give away magnitudes, billions, trillions more than I could give.
Sure. There's that, the tension of intent and impact.
Yeah.
And some discourses, there's emphasis really focused on the impact in terms of privilege dynamics.
Yeah.
But in this, Jesus is really lifting up the value of intent as well.
Yeah.
I'm struggling with the fact that the Gospels and Jesus generally don't have a really strong grasp of or care about basic economic principles, right? We're talking about this. It doesn't add up. It really doesn't. And his followers didn't either, I think. I think there's a good news in this, but I'm trying to pull this together, is that no one was thinking that this is a good lesson for a good sound financial planning for the church, that would have an endowment and have pensions for the priests like 2,000 years in the future.
Right.
In fact, I think most people thought that Jesus was going to go very well. I think a lot of people thought that Jesus was going to go free them from the empire and then we live in heaven and do whatever the new kingdom is within their lifetimes. And I think, but the story still causes us to talk about this widow and her gift today, even in whatever that framework projected 2,000 years into our time now, where we have these really reasonable understandings of, well, if we give people the money this way, then they'll spend it responsibly. That's like the way to send sound economic policy and have people live in a just society. It's not. I mean, we're not doing it, but we talk about the story still. So I think there's some good news in that. But it's still, even though it doesn't make any sense at all, and no one does it anyway, even if it did, we're still struggling with it here.
Yeah, so there's perhaps some naivety in this, and it's not the sound economic plan, the sound strategic visioning or like capital fund plan, etc. Perhaps it would decrease the overall amount of giving, back to an earlier point, and yet maybe that's good news that we don't need to always focus on things that are sometimes beyond our own power.
I see good news in that the widow had faith that maybe there's someone in need more than her, that she felt comfortable, I don't know if she felt comfortable, but she believed in a system that took care of people and they were going to use her money to do good works. And had faith that she would be okay without those 2 points. Because she trusted God.
She trusted in God, she trusted in an institution,
Yes.
which there isn't much of these days.
I mean, I think there's good news in Jesus affirming the fact that power is, or value is not held by the most wealthy. That is not where our value should be placed or found.
Sure, yeah. Value does not come from how big of a check you can write.
I think it's nice that she got to be honored, because even though she's a widow and she's like really poor, and no one really thinks much of her, she did a big thing.
Yeah, so it's important that we are still remembering her, honoring her for her part in the story. Sam's the best word.
I'm sitting here with a whole, perhaps this is tangential, I'm not sure, but for me, the good news is that she, the widow, is even being recognized at all. And that she actually has some funds to give. Because in the time of the story takes place 2,000 years ago, women, their only value was their connection to the man in their life, to their husband. And that people that didn't, women that didn't have that connection to a husband had no place in society. So for her to have lost her husband, the definition of being a widow, means that she could have been subjugated such to the point where she may have no funds at all because it might have been taken away from her because she no longer had the husband to supply it. So that she may not have even gotten any kind of inheritance once he died, possibly. But the fact that she is there, does have some money, and I mean, obviously not very much, but there's some, and that she's allowed to even come into the temple on her own, it gives her recognition. which is, it's nice to see that in fact she was allowed to continue functioning in society.
Yeah. Yeah, so the recognition, the ability to still engage with society, that she could do that despite the challenges of her life. Well, thank you all for wandering along with me. We're now going to head to the font, and